Hey, boys and girls, Mr. McAvoy here. I wanted to do a lesson on triangles and quadrilaterals to classify. I want to start by showing you guys a video here on classifying triangles. I'll kind of introduce the lesson first.
How can you classify triangles? Triangles can be classified by the line segments that make their sides. An equilateral triangle has 3 sides the same length. Can you draw an equilateral triangle another way? You can only make an equilateral triangle larger or smaller, or turn it. You cannot change its shape because you cannot change the angles. An isosceles triangle has at least 2 sides the same length. A scalene triangle has no sides the same length. Triangles can also be classified by their angle measures. A right triangle has 1 right angle. An acute triangle has 3 acute angles. How can you describe the measures of these angles? All of an acute triangle's angles measure less than a right angle. An obtuse triangle has 1 obtuse angle. How can you describe the measures of this angle? One angle of an obtuse triangle has a measure greater than a right angle. Triangles can also be classified by both their angle measures and their sides. The red triangle is an obtuse scalene triangle. Can you draw an obtuse equilateral triangle?
Select your answer.
No, you cannot draw an obtuse equilateral triangle because in an equilateral triangle, all 3 angles are acute.
Now you know how to classify triangles.
Okay, boys and girls. I know you're familiar with those videos, but I also want to show you this page from your Pearson book right here. This kind of shows you all the different types of triangles. We classify triangles by their sides and their angles. Let's talk about their sides. If you see a triangle with all equal sides, all 3 sides the same length, it's got to be equilateral. You know, all triangles have 3 sides. So if all 3 sides are the same length, we call it equilateral. If you see a triangle with 2 equal sides, such as this one right here, we call that isosceles because it has at least 2 sides the same length. If you see a triangle such as this with no equal sides, we call it scalene. No sides the same length. And we can take a look at all these and see they're the same length. Now, we can identify triangles by their angles. So look at this triangle. See how it has a right angle right here? Well, if a triangle has 1 right angle, it's automatically a right triangle. Even though it has 2 acute angles here, it does not matter. It's still a right angle. Now, be careful. Sometimes it could be upside down, and the right angle could be like over here. So sometimes you may have to look at all of them carefully because it might not look like a right angle. Look at this angle right here. Notice that it has 3 acute angles. 1, 2, 3, all acute. Well, that makes an acute triangle. All 3 angles are acute. It is an acute triangle. Now, with an obtuse triangle, as long as it has 1 obtuse angle, see this angle right here, boys and girls? As long as it has 1 obtuse angle, the whole thing is an obtuse triangle. Even though these 2 are acute, doesn't matter. As long as it has 1 obtuse angle, the whole thing is an obtuse triangle. And we can put these 2 together. So notice this equilateral triangle. Notice also it has 3 acute angles. Well, I can call this an acute equilateral triangle because it has all equal sides and 3 acute angles. Now this one right here, notice how again has an acute angle here, an acute angle here, an acute angle here. Well, I can call this an acute isosceles triangle Now look at this triangle right here. We know it's scaling because it has all different sides. But notice how it has a obtuse angle right here. Well, that makes the whole thing's obtuse, even though these two here are acute. We can call this an obtuse scaling triangle. Now look at this right angle right here. Notice how this side and this side are the same length, but this diagonal is longer. Well, that would make this a right isosceles triangle because it has a one right angle, but it has two sides right here the same length. Now you can also take a piece of paper if you're not quite sure if they're equal. I like to take a piece of paper, put it right next to the screen, and mark it, and you can kind of take that and compare the sides. Now look at this one right here. We know it's the acute triangle, but if you notice, no sides are the same length, and I can measure these to prove it. But this, even though they might look the same, like I said, if you get a piece of paper, measure it, mark it off with a pencil, and then take it and measure it up with this one, you'll see that these are all different lengths. So that would make this an acute scaling triangle. Now this one right here we know is obtuse because there's an obtuse angle, but boys and girls, again, notice how these sides are all different lengths. I know it might appear these two are the same, but they're not. This one right here is longer. So this would be an obtuse scaling triangle, okay? So these are all the different triangles we're gonna be talking about, okay? Now let's switch gears. Let's talk about quadrilaterals. We know a triangle is a three-sided figure. So you can probably figure out a quadrilateral. Quad means four. That a quadrilateral is a four-sided figure. So I want to go and I want to show you all the video on quadrilaterals. And this is again right from Pearson. So I'm going to go and I'm going to play the video for you all.
Quadrilaterals have properties that make them different from one another. How can you classify quadrilaterals? Think about this question during the lesson. A quadrilateral is a polygon with four sides. Quadrilaterals are classified by their or the line segments that make their sides. Which of the quadrilaterals shown have only one pair of parallel sides? Which have two pairs of parallel sides? A parallelogram has two pairs of parallel sides. This quadrilateral is a rectangle. What type of angle does a rectangle have? Select your answer. A rectangle has four right angles. Why can a rectangle also be called a parallelogram? A rectangle is also a parallelogram because it has two pairs of parallel sides. A square has four right angles and all sides are the same length. Why can a square also be called a parallelogram? A square is also a parallelogram because it has two pairs of parallel sides. Why can a square also be named a rectangle? A square is also a rectangle because it has four right angles. A rhombus is a quadrilateral that has opposite sides that are parallel, and all of its sides are the same length. A square is also a rhombus because it is a quadrilateral with opposite sides that are parallel, and all of its sides are the same length. A rhombus is also a parallelogram because it has two pairs of parallel sides. This quadrilateral is a trapezoid. A trapezoid is a quadrilateral with only one pair of parallel sides. Parallelograms, rectangles, squares, and rhombuses all have two pairs of parallel sides. Now you know how to classify quadrilaterals.
Okay, well, I know you're familiar with the visual learning. Let me show you again this page from Pearson. This kind of, again, just like the triangles, this shows you all of the different types of quadrilaterals. So remember, quadrilateral means four-sided figure. So parallelogram, rectangle, squares, rhombus, trapezoid are all examples of those. These are the examples we're going to talk about. So a parallelogram is simply a quadrilateral with two pairs of parallel sides. Notice so these two right here, that's one pair. And then these two right here, that's the second pair. Now, a parallelogram is not a rhombus because notice this one does not have all equal sides. If it has a parallelogram with all equal sides would either be a square or a rhombus. Okay, so a rectangle is a quadrilateral because it has 4 sides clearly, and a rectangle has 4 right angles. 1, 2, 3, 4. And a rectangle also is a parallelogram because it has 2 pairs of parallel sides. These two, that's one. These two on the sides, that's another pair. So that's a parallelogram. So a square is also a parallelogram because it has 2 pairs of parallel sides, the top and bottom, and the left and the right side. Those are parallel as well. That's 2 pairs. So a square, all squares can be rectangles because to be a rectangle, all you need is 4 right angles in a parallelogram. So a square meets those requirements. But to be all rectangles can't be squares because to be a square, you have to have 4 right angles and all equal sides. So a rhombus is a parallelogram. Notice how it has the top and bottom are parallel, and the left and right are parallel. So that is a parallelogram. But a rhombus has all equal sides. That's how these two are different because a rhombus has all equal sides. A rhombus is a parallelogram. So a parallelogram includes this figure right here, which is just a parallelogram. A rectangle, a square, and a rhombus are all considered parallelogram. Now, a rhombus is a quadrilateral that has opposite sides that are parallel. See how these opposite sides are parallel? And all the sides are the same length. Well, guess what? That would mean a square would be a rhombus too, because a square is a quadrilateral. A square does have opposite sides the same length, and a square is also parallelogram. So interestingly enough, squares can be considered a rhombus. But typically, this is what a rhombus would look like, okay? And then a trapezoid is not a parallelogram because it only has 1 pair of parallel sides. See these top and bottom ones? That's it. These two right here are not parallel because if you would continue, they would cross, okay? So trapezoid is not a parallelogram. I also want to point out some other features. We can also classify quadrilaterals by their angles. Notice how this parallelogram has opposite equal angles of the same measure. See how these 2 angles are both about the same, and then these 2 are the same? So it has 2 obtuse and 2 acute angles, whereas a rectangle and a square has 4 right angles, right? A rhombus, same thing, has 2 acute angles, see them right here? And they're the same measure. These 2 right here are the same measure. They're both the same measure acute angles. And then look at these 2. They have opposite equal angles. These 2 are obtuse. So rhombus has 2 acute angles and 2 obtuse angles. And this trapezoid right here, this would be specifically an isosceles trapezoid because look, these 2 sides are the same length. See it? You could also have something called a right triangle. If it had a right angle in there, it would be a right trapezoid. Okay. So a trapezoid also has, if you look, 2 acute angles. See them right here on the bottom, this one, and 2 obtuse angles. And these 2 obtuse angles, these are equal, adjacent, obtuse angles of the same measure. And these 2 acute angles on the bottom are also the same measure. Okay, so those are some of the ways we classify quadrilaterals. And these are the specific types of quadrilaterals that we are going to talk about: parallelogram, rectangle, square, rhombus, and trapezoid. If you simply see a 4-sided figure that is not a parallelogram, a rectangle, square, a rhombus, or a trapezoid, we just call it a quadrilateral. Okay, boys and girls, good luck on this lesson, and I'll talk to you again soon.